Everybody, welcome to another episode of Basement Betek. Today, with me on my show is Dr. Talha Abdul Razak. He holds a PhD from the University of Exeter in Syria. We just lost track of who's who in the Syrian zoo.
There are literally dozens of different rebel factions, and not all of them are joined up in underneath sort of like one kind of rebel commander, even to this day, by the way. As the rebels from the north very recently were pushing into Homs, which is in central Syria, which was kind of the last stop before Damascus, rebels in the south reactivate where they had been quiet for a long time in a city called Dar'a. And Dar'a is obviously the cradle of the Syrian revolution. You had a lot of infighting. Brought Shi'i militants in from even like the Hazara communities in Afghanistan, the Zainabiyun from Pakistan, and they gave them land that formerly belonged to Sunni Arabs. And in the Arab world, you've got three main pillars: Iraq, Syria, Egypt. This was very much a domestic, homegrown effort. These aren't people that are just stupid without any agency, without any ideas of their own. Because what you can't do is advance south and then all of a sudden you leave your rear open and then Idlib is captured right from underneath your nose. There was also a very well-orchestrated charm offensive where Jolani would specifically, send envoys and emissaries, and even he himself would attend gatherings, for example, of Christians. When he sits with CNN, he's sat in his kind of Zelensky-style military uniform. What the hell is he doing?
I was about to drop an F-bomb. We can't screw around here. Drones will become like the light infantry of the future.
It's a pretty wild thing to say if you think about it.
What are let's say, the top 3 or 4 tactical changes that they've done in terms of weaponry, in terms of how they fight?
An army marches on its stomach, basically. Logistically bettering themselves, building up a drone strike capability, building up a missile strike capability as well, highly trained special forces units, and night fighting. It's this conspiratorial, frankly idiotic mindset that has held us back for so long. Let's not be children here. This is the real world. Black markets, and you mentioned Pakistan. Some of the best gunsmiths I have ever seen on the face of this earth are from Pakistan.
When I see these simplistic takes online, Syrian girl or partisan girl, whatever her name is, on
half a million followers for that airheaded moron. So the Israeli encroachment is into Qunaytara. When you see the shambles of the Assadist army, you'll understand why it took the Iraqi armed forces to hold the Israelis back. But it's a serious security threat. And I would say the main country to watch out of all of these countries is Iraq, because Assad is gone, his power is broken, and Iran is now in retreat. Get over it.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Basement Betek. Today, with me on my show is Dr. Talha Abdul Razak. Dr. Talha is an award-winning academic and expert on the Arab world, particularly as it relates to its political and military issues. He holds a PhD from the University of Exeter in military strategy and security, with a specific focus on military science and operations in the context of the Iran-Iraq war through the 80s, which pretty much 80 to the 88. He's a regular figure in the mainstream media. You might have read a lot of his articles on Al Jazeera, as I did over the years. And he provides expert commentary and analysis, and is recognized for his in-depth insights and analysis. So without further ado, welcome on the show, Talha.
Thanks a lot, brother. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, first time that we're talking face-to-face. We have been back and forth on Twitter world.
That's right, yeah. It's been a while.
So much going on in the Arab world, specifically in a part of the Arab world that has been very confusing to most of us Ajamis, believe it or not. We've been trying to make head and tails of what happened, who are the groups inside Syria, what's going on, who are all the influences. There's so many geopolitically relevant states around Syria that it's important to understand that context. And I think with your education and your experience, you bring that to the table, and that's why I have you on the show. You've written about Iraq, Iran, Syria, and in so many other states, Turkey, and there are a lot of stories about how you got nicked and doxxed throughout the years, owing to your very outspoken opinions. So what I want to do, the objective of this show is that I want to understand more about what's going on. Specifically, since we dropped the ball, a lot of us stopped following what's going on in Syria. I think around 2018, when there was a kind of a surrender of sorts done, where a lot of the regional backers of Syrian resistance kind of backed off. Whether the Saudis, the UAE, and who have you, they all backed out, and there was kind of like a tacit agreement on, okay, Assad has won the war. Let's stick to the way that is, and they moved on. So, but even before that, when the whole Arab Spring started in 2011, with so many groups coming and fighting into Syria, we just lost track of who's who in the Syrian zoo, and we just kind of completely. It's never made sense to us, even up till now. So we've heard of some figures in the past, like Jolani and who have you. So what I want to do with you is start getting a full understanding of who the groups are. So what I'll do is I'll try to base this like how the project management is done. The very first step is you identify the key stakeholders in an organization. Not that this is an organization, but it's very important to understand of who's who in the Syrian zoo. So I want to do that with you, and then we'll go into some of the complexities about what has actually happened from a military strategy and tactical level. So I'm seeing this a lot like Afghanistan 2.0, where not a lot of resistance is happening ever since Russia's kind of backed off a little bit, um, and not many bullets have been fired, and just as we speak, Damascus has already been liberated. So I want your opinion on that. So uh, just let's start with the very first question. So who are all these groups inside the Syrian resistance? And I mean, they seem to be very different. Some of them are, a lot of people talk about, and we've seen videos of people from the Turkic regions. Even the Uyghurs have been seen fighting with the Syrian resistance. So, can you give us a little just a little explanation on who the groups are and how they interact with one another? Is there a central leadership in all of this?
So, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on. And like you said, we have been talking and sharing each other's content on Twitter for a long time. So I think that this chat of ours has been a long time coming, alhamdulillah. So it's good to be here. In terms of the question, looking at Syria, yes, I can see why people are confused. There are literally dozens of different rebel factions, and not all of them are joined up in underneath sort of like one kind of rebel command, even to this day, by the way. So, for example, while there are rebels in the north, there were also rebels in the south of the country. And as the rebels from the north very recently were pushing into Homs, which is in central Syria, which was kind of the last stop before Damascus, rebels in the south reactivated, where they had been quiet for a long time, in a city called Dar'a. And Dar'a is obviously the kind of the cradle of the Syrian revolution. I've mentioned elsewhere about the martyr Hamza al-Khatib, whose death, he's a 13-year-old boy. He was brutally murdered and then had his body mutilated by the Assad regime, and horrifically sent back to his family as a message, and not just to his family. Obviously, it was the wider Syrian people. You do anything like this to us, we don't even care if your child is 13 years old, 12 years old, younger, older. We're going to kill them. We're going to butcher them. And that kind of got the revolution going. So, years later, 13 years later now, after Hamza al-Khatib's murder, we see that Dar'a liberated itself once more as the Syrian rebels from the north were pushing in. But they were formed under a separate command. So when Dar'a was being liberated, some of these other groups inside Dar'a announced that, they were part of I think they called themselves Southern Military Operations Command or something like this, which is a distinct entity from what's known as the Military Operations Command that have come from Idlib in the north. That doesn't mean that they're not going to cooperate and collaborate and work with one another, and that's my hope indeed is for that to happen. But there are also different backers for these different groups. So, for example, the guys in the north are well known to have had links to neighboring Turkey. Meanwhile, the guys in the south, around Dar'a and these areas, are known to have worked with, up until today, Jordanian intelligence, for example. And so you can see these different spheres of influence building up in the country. Now, it goes without saying, the southern rebels were not as organized or as powerful, or indeed had the kind of freedom of movement or action as the northern rebels did. And even amongst the northern rebels, there were a lot of infighting and bloodshed. So this is one of the things that's actually so intriguing in many ways, inspiring in others, is to see how these rebel factions actually came together. They were actually killing each other not too long ago, like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly known as the Nusra Front. This is going to be the main group that everyone's going to be hearing about. This is going to be the main group that everyone's going to be interested in, and its leader, of course, Abu Muhammad al-Julani. The reason being, obviously, is that he started his career actually in Iraq. His training was all Iraqi. And obviously, Iraq is next door to Syria, and it has its own long-standing problems with Iranian occupation, US occupation, and a lot of foreign meddling from all sorts of actors, including Turkey and the Gulf Arab states, and Syria at one point, by the way. But we can go into that on another time. So he actually had he cut his teeth in the Iraqi insurgency. He was trained by Iraqi insurgents. He was part of the organization known at the time as, in the West at least, as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And, he was then captured, imprisoned. And then when he was released, one of the missions that he was given was to go to Syria, his homeland, and, start this process of setting up a franchise in Syria, which he did. But what was not expected by the Al Qaeda HQ was, and also his kind of his direct commanders in the chain of command in Iraq. What was not expected was that he would break away and do his own thing, which is precisely what he did. So, what became an interesting feature of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Jolani's strategy was that although they were known as Jabhat al-Nusra at one point in the Syrian civil war, and they were known as the most effective fighters against the Assad regime, after things kind of started to fall apart and various rebel factions started to give in, and some of them would kind of make deals with the regime so that they basically come back under the fold of the Syrian Assadist state. The remaining rebels, and HCS being among them, were relocated to Idlib. And Idlib, I don't know if how many of your viewers have been to Syria, but it's not necessarily known as like kind of a key hub in Syria at all. Like it's not something with massive significance, just say like Aleppo or Damascus. Yeah, it's not being any of these things. However, it gained that importance because it became the only real hub of resistance against the Assadist Ba'athist Nusayra regime. And that's why it gained its importance. And in that cauldron, you had a lot of infighting. And one of the things that's very interesting is how Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, for example, went after groups like Ahrar al-Sham. And Ahrar al-Sham had a kind of a Syrian, they were very much Islamists, but they had the kind of like a Syria first approach, where elements of Syrian nationalism were incorporated into their ideology. And they sought to achieve some kind of Islamic state within the existing nation-state borders of Syria. The reason being behind that, I suspect, and as other analysts have also elucidated upon, is to basically avoid upsetting too much the regional order. The idea being that obviously if you rock the boat too much, you're going to capsize the whole thing. So you may as well have a more achievable objective. Whether people agree with that or not is another matter. But what's clear is that at the time, Jolani didn't agree with it. And he fought them and he killed many of them. Just as he fought other rebel factions. But Ahrar al-Sham was one of the more well-known ones, one of the better organized ones. They had a lot of public support as well. Whereas Jolani's popularity was actually not that much in comparison. Like he wasn't seen as someone who's going to be this, all-saving, all-conquering hero, like he kind of is being lionized as today. It was actually not like that at all in the very recent past. So he also went after his former brothers-in-arms with the ISIS group and Al-Qaeda, and he was well known for hunting down these operatives and killing them. So this is another feature that was very interesting in the evolution of Jolani's personality. Naturally, that led to allegations that, he's faithless, he's treacherous, even his brothers-in-arms who fought with him for years in Iraq couldn't trust him, and in fact he went and murdered them and killed them, and so on. The idea being that they're trying to paint this picture of Jolani as a character who is simply power hungry. It doesn't matter who his allies are. It doesn't matter who his friends are. You could be his friend today and his enemy tomorrow. You could be his enemy today and his friend tomorrow. And in a way, in a manner of speaking, that has sort of panned out. Because what he's successfully managed to do since these ceasefires, since you rightly pointed out about the kind of the regional forces getting, tired of the Syrian conflict and backing away. And then you had the so-called Astana process, which was agreed upon between Turkey and Russia and Iran to basically exchange populations. Everyone saw those horrific buses that would, evacuate people. Rebels, basically, who lived their entire lives in their city, were packed onto buses and forced into Idlib as part of the terms and conditions of their surrender. So, to see them now coming back home, it's not surprising why they're so happy. I mean, Sometimes I feel like, although I know I'm speaking to you right now, it's almost like I'm not quite fully embodied. I'm not even from Syria, right? But the elation that I feel for them is something I can hardly describe. I've been awake all night. In fact, I've barely slept since since late November. It may be coming across because I'm finally starting to crash and my system's slowing down. So it may be coming across to your audience. So I do apologize to everyone and to you, of course, if I'm a bit slow on the uptake. But now after all those years of them being bussed out of their homes, evacuated, forcibly displaced, now they're coming back. And there are videos of them saying, You forced us out with buses, but we've now come back to you with tanks.
Thanks. Yep.
So it's really something. It's a remarkable change in a very short period of time. And I remember being kind of in the depths of that gloom. I was like, one of the few lone voices out here in the UK in particular, and in the West, who was speaking in the media and trying to keep up this flame of righteous revolution. It's not just a case of people wanting anarchy and chaos. They don't want anarchy and chaos. The beginning of the revolution was never about that anyway. It was about reform. Assad made it about revolution. He made it about revolution. To begin with, the Syrians, they just wanted reform. They wanted more rights. They wanted their dignity. And rather than giving them that, he gave them bullets, blood, torture, rape, and death. And today, he's being packed off in humiliation. My only regret about all of this, by the way, is that he wasn't grabbed, put on trial, and given the public justice that he so desperately deserves, and the people of Syria deserve with him.
Yeah, and that's one reason of this discussion. We'll come back to that in a little bit about how has he been able to escape, where their underhand deals being done. Because you spoke up a lot of these powers, Turkey, Jordan, there's Russia, quite obviously. So all of these powers sitting together, Iran for obvious reasons. Some kind of understanding was had somewhere that let's just extricate this guy out and let these guys take over. We'll come to that a little later. So you talked about all these different groups and their drivers and the infighting between them. Thank you so much for that, because that starts making sense now. I was not even aware that the southern militants, if I can call them that, or freedom fighters, did not even have much to do with the northern ones. So the Idlib versus the we're not really talking to one another as such. They're taking each other's leads, but not necessarily inside the same central leadership.
Yeah. So they don't share a command structure, because just to be clear, they don't share a command structure, but they would have definitely been, talking with one another. At the end of the day,
Absolutely.
They're both anti-Assad Syrians, and let's not forget also there's rebels in the eastern part, around for example, where the US base is at El Tenf, for example. And not to mention, obviously, the Kurdish rebels, I say rebels, sometimes working with the regime, very pragmatic group who are trying to basically create their own Kurdish rump state. And that's another whole issue entirely.
And I think that's another reason why I talk about, how a lot of people see this as homogenous groups, which they are not. Even the backers, like the state of Turkey, for example, a lot of people seem to be thinking that Jolani is their front man, at least for the time being. But then you could quite clearly know that Jolani and Turkey have these kind of disagreements, because of which maybe later on we might see more fights. Like Turkey will never accept like a very independent Kurdish group which is armed, which could come into conflict with how Jolani is trying to manage his own affairs. So, but that's besides the point. We get this understanding now what's going on. Now, a lot of people in this whole thing seem to be very focused on what's happening, and rightly so, what's happening in Palestine. Okay, that's where everything got, let's say, the first domino fell, and this all seems to be like a domino effect going on within the region. A lot of people are concerned. I'm seeing a lot of tweets about how this is distracting from because a lot of people who look at the Israel-Palestine conflict try to see it with the lens of the Iranian propaganda machine that's very, very active on Twitter specifically. So they feel like, oh no, the axis of resistance is crumbling. We were misled. People were saying that they're getting territory, but now quite obviously it's playing out, and they can see that it was all a hoax. It was all a smokescreen, and actually the axis is starting to fall apart. And this is the very first strike that they're seeing Israel has committed in terms of the first, what will I call it now? The first block in the axis falling. Okay, so what do you have to say to these guys? Because a lot of people see it from the October 7, 2023 lens, and I think that is the wrong way to look at it. But before I give my own thoughts on this, I would definitely want to hear from you, because you're, like I said, you're into military strategies and you understand the region much better than I do.
Brother, what can I say to you other than, look, we've been doing this for decades. Well, I certainly have been, unfortunately. So when they say that the axis of resistance, and they use all this kind of sloganeering, and Iran has this whole Quds Day thing, let's look at the axis of resistance. What were they resisting? This whole issue did not start on the 7th of October 2023. Like I said to you, it's been going on for decades. It's been going on for a long time indeed. The conflict with Iran is even older. Like I said to you, I studied the Iran-Iraq War, which was kind of the genesis of the problems that you're seeing today starts there. One day, inshallah, I'll get around to publishing a book or two about the Iran-Iraq War so that people can see how the chaos that we see today in the region directly has its roots in that war. So, but in the meantime, what was the axis of resistance? Resisting. As far as I can see, they did almost nothing towards Israel or towards meaningfully contributing to the liberation of Palestine. Yes, we look at, for example, the Houthis firing some rockets and some missiles from Yemen over to Israel. Yes, we saw Hezbollah shelling some communication towers in northern Israel. Yeah, we see these things, but we also know what else Hezbollah is capable of because we saw them in action in Syria. What did they do in Syria? They didn't just shell a few communication towers. They went in force, with heavy weapons, with medium-range ballistic missiles, with dozens of various Shi'i terrorist outfits, stretching all the way from Pakistan and the Zainabiyun into Afghanistan and the Fatimiyun, through to Iraq and the Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is about 70 different Shi'i groups, by the way, and then into Syria, training them all, commanding them all at the behest of the so-called Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, and leveling entire Syrian cities, absolutely destroying them. They had tremendous firepower at their disposal. Did we see even 1% of that firepower brought to bear against Israel? No. Even after Israel started bombing them in the Dahia, which is south of Beirut, and the Janubi areas of Lebanon, which is their heartland, Israel had declared war against them, had invaded Lebanon, had bombed the hell out of them, had killed their leader. And all they were doing was releasing these Hollywood videos of the weapon stockpiles inside mountains. And they're showing off these massive missiles. And they're saying, Israel, we're going to hit you with these missiles. Go on. You certainly did hit Syrian Muslims. You certainly helped the Iraqi Shi'i militias to destroy Iraqi cities. You can't bring the same firepower to bear in Israel to liberate Palestine properly. Let's get serious here. This is just a masquerade, and it's a part of a theater. And what's hilarious is that despite it being a theater, they were still punished for it, which I find phenomenal because they did the absolute, the whole idea of this axis of resistance. This the phraseology itself comes from Iranian propaganda. Yeah, the axis of resistance, comprising of Iran, which is the spear tip of the resistance, right? And then you've got Iraq, which is now under Iranian occupation. You've got Syria. You've got Hezbollah in Lebanon. You've got the various different, the Yemeni Houthis, for example, and all these other satellite factions. And all they managed to do was destroy Sunni power. I'm not talking about Sunni Arab despots, by the way. I'm not talking about governments who are enthralled to foreign powers. I'm talking about Sunni Arab power in the sense of the local people in Iraq, people in Syria, people in Lebanon who are, in every sense of the word, ready, willing, and able to take up arms and to fight these causes. But instead, obviously, they are oppressed either by their own leadership, which is backed by foreign powers, or they're being oppressed by Iranian occupation and colonization. And I say colonization, by the way, and I don't use that term loosely, because they do genuinely flood Iraqi cities and Syrian cities with, well, not Syrian cities anymore, I'm very, very pleased to say, but they did commit demographic change. They brought Shi'i militants in from even like the Hazara communities in Afghanistan, the Zainabiyun from Pakistan, and they gave them land that formerly belonged to Sunni Arabs in Iraq and Syria. You just imagine that. So you're criticizing Israel on the one hand for taking Arab land in Palestine, and you're saying it's monstrous and it's colonization and it's apartheid and all of this, the nice stuff that they can put out into their propaganda materials. And yet they do the same thing, but on a significantly larger scale than Israel, across two of the Arab world's main pillars. And in the Arab world, you've got three main pillars: Iraq, Syria, Egypt. More so than the Islamic heartlands, obviously, of Mecca, Medina. These will always be sacred and holy to every Muslim. But in terms of political power, it's always been those three countries: Iraq, Syria, Egypt. And they never managed to reach Egypt. God knows what would happen if they did. But they did reach Iraq and they did reach Syria, and they did everything in their power to crumple those two countries. And let's not forget as well, Iraq was the only Arab country, and whatever his other faults, and there are many, but whatever his other faults, Saddam Hussein was actively resisting Israel. And unlike Iran, when Saddam Hussein attacked Israel, he did it with force. It was genuine force, whatever he could muster at that time, and it was during the Gulf War. There were actual fatalities for a start. The only thing that the Iranians managed to achieve was they killed a Palestinian. Like it's just how can I say? It's the most horrifically poetic thing ever. Is that they're the ones who talk night and day about resistance, and instead of actually resisting Israel, they go ahead and kill Palestinians instead. Yeah, like you can't make it up. You really can't make it up. It's astonishing how people still fall for this stuff. And then obviously their propagandists will come out and they're like, "Oh, it's because they're very humane. They're very humane. They only did this because they wanted to target Israeli military installations. They destroyed F-35s. Didn't you see it, brother? Didn't you see it?" No,
Yeah.
actually, I didn't. I didn't see it at all. And believe me, I watched closely. They didn't destroy any F-35s. They didn't majorly damage any Israeli military infrastructure. And if they're so humane with the Israelis, it would be nice for them to extend that humanity to their so-called Muslim brothers and sisters in Iraq and in Syria. But they never did. And the reason for that is because they consider us not to be Muslim brothers and sisters. They consider us to be even worse than non-Muslims, Jews, Zionists, whatever. You name it, they consider those better than actual Sunni Muslims in Iraq and Syria, who they think it's halal to rape, kill, murder, torture, and dispossess. So, I cannot believe anyone falls for this nonsense anymore.
Yeah.
And it's gone on for far, far too long. And it's enough, frankly, it's enough.
And Taha, just if I can chime in over here.
Yeah, please.
Even if you divorce all this sectarian stuff like Sunni, Shia, and what have you, if you look from just a geopolitical perspective, and you're a guy who's done military strategies, I did one episode with a friend of mine, in fact, 2 or 3 of them, where we talked about the Iranian doctrine, which was built up with what you did your PhD in, the Iraq War, and how it built this doctrine of Iran trying to expand its military presence inside the Arab world. And in these key states, Egypt would have been one, but the fact that they concentrated, for example, Lebanon, which is like a gateway into the Mediterranean, in Yemen, which is again the Bab al-Mandab, so that's a choke point right again. So they're trying to expand into these key states, and they did it with the start of Saddam Hussein, where when the Americans came in and bombed him. I mean, we all know at the time that the Iranians were happy with that. So American, Israeli, and Iranian interests kind of converge at that point. And when Saddam fell, they started growing their presence inside. And over the course of the last 2 decades, they grew their influence in all these Arab states. And like you said, they moved human capital from as far off as Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they brought them into and stationed them into Syria and Lebanon. But they played a military game. And as a guy who kind of tries to pseudo-analyze these things, I like what they did. I may not agree ideologically with them, but I was seeing that in the geopolitical chessboard, they seem to be outmaneuvering the Arabs. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And this is for the first time I'm seeing the Arabs hit back. What has sparked that and what hasn't, I do not know. It'll become clear in the times. Maybe what happened in October 7, 2023 might be kind of like let's say a little splinter that has sparked the fire. I don't know that for sure. When we see 10 years more of this, maybe we can look back and make sense of that. But tell me this. A lot of this, the gains that we're seeing are kind of like non-military gains, okay? Because they seem to be like, and I trace this back to 2018 when I stopped following the case. And full disclosure, Talha, when this whole thing started back in 2011, I actually was, I won't say pro-Assad or pro-Assad or Bashar, whatever. I mean, you can even go before that to his father, Hafiz. And I was not pro them, but I was like, okay, the geopolitical chessboard seems the way that the Sunni resistance is not going to work. Okay, the reason why I kind of tagged along with Bouti and many other Sunni scholars in Syria was because I saw that just from the point of view, and we're talking about an era where Russia was in the ascendancy. Okay, they won over many of their little battles that they were having, proxy battles that they were having with the Americans inside Eastern Europe and maybe even bordering with Russia. So I was thinking that these guys are on the ascendancy and they're going to flatten out any gains that unless the Americans would have or the Turks would have come in full time. There was just no taking on Russia backing the Iranians at the point. But then, what has happened in the last 6 months for specifically, especially with Turkey getting a little agitated about what's going on and wanting to assert their influence in the region because they know that at the end of the day, if the Israelis start encroaching into Syria and they've definitely encroached, with all the talk about Hezbollah being a good fighting force, and I don't contest that asymmetrically at least, they have moved into this into the south. And they're in a position now, the Israelis, to annex that territory if they want. So they are expanding. They're expanding into southern Lebanon. They're expanding into western Syria. And Turkey cannot just sit this out. They have to exert their influence now and try to, if not push back, then check this forward push by the Israelis. So I see all of that, and it starts making sense. And this is why I see now Sunni power kind of like coming back in. That we've lost a lot of this stuff, but put the military aside for now. Coming back to that point when I dropped the ball in 2018. What has happened from 2018 up till now? We have not seen any like major military escalations from the Syrian resistance. What I do remember is a lot of political maneuvering happening in that time period. Where people say Jolani is a changed man. I do see that. To some extent, like he was talking to different tribes, to different localities, and trying to build bridges. Even with Iran to some extent, okay? And he was kind of like, and that's why I think a lot of this gains that we're seeing, the non-military gains, and no bullets being fired, is because of this overall local versus the regional. For like what Turkey, Iran, and Russia, I believe they have some kind of tripartite dialogue where they must have agreed to some kind of understanding. So, what is your take on that? On what happened between 2018 and 2023, or now 2024, as well as what's happening behind the scenes with all these major stakeholders?
I mean, the main thing when it comes to the last major kind of tit-for-tat exchanges between the regime and the resistance was around about 2020. So there was a ceasefire around about 2020 rather than 2018. And in the ensuing 4 years, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and a bunch of these other factions decided that, we have to consolidate in some way not only our rule over Idlib, but also we need to prepare for the next phase of the war, because the war isn't over. And well, it is now, but inshallah anyway soon. But at that time, it was still very much a weakened position that they were holding in Idlib. So a few things happened. They learned, particularly HTS, how to govern. Because prior to that, they weren't really governing, they were just fighting. But then all of a sudden, they were in large control of Idlib, which meant that they learned how to function somewhat like a proto-state, including issuing ID cards, managing state employees, education facilities, health facilities, taxation to a degree, tariffs on goods entering their borders. There was actually some sort of trade going on as well between Idlib and some regime-held territories, some Kurdish-held territories, obviously with the Turkish-held territories. When I say Turkish, obviously I mean the Free Syrian Army and their allied groups. So they started to learn how to function as a state. And once they had that prototype, that blueprint down, it then became I would say, a moderating influence on their behavior, in the sense that you went from a maximalist approach, which was kind of the Al-Qaeda, and taken to the absolute extreme end of it, ISIS way of thinking, to actually being in a position where, hang on a second, we're governing. There's all these different kinds of peoples with different kinds of views and beliefs and whatever else who live under us. How do we govern this territory while maintaining our strength, maintaining our power, and maintaining our control, and not agitating the populace under us to the point where they want to see us overthrown? And that was a very genuine fear that they would have had, because they had no solid footing at that point in time. Everything was kind of very shaky. There was always the fear that Turkey would cut an extra deal with Russia or the Assad regime and try to get out. Indeed, as recently as earlier this year, Turkey was making strong overtures, including speeches by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Strong overtures, wanting to mend fences with Assad. And I think he massively regrets it now, by the way. But Assad at the time just refused to engage with Erdogan at all, and which was incredibly foolish. I used to always look at that and I used to think, what the hell is he doing? Yes, you seem to have the upper hand right now, but isn't it better not to have a country which has troops on your soil and within your borders, and that has strong influence over numerous armed factions? Isn't it better to take them off of the board by making some kind of peace deal with them? Strategy would dictate, yes, you may not personally like Erdogan, but this is politics. It's not about who you like. It's not about who you dislike. This is a very morally and emotionally ambivalent place. And yet he made an emotional decision to rebuff Erdogan, and which kept Erdogan kind of in the game. And, let's not underestimate how much, it was required for Turkey to be somewhat involved in what was going on. And I don't want to overplay it, by the way, because a lot of people are overplaying it, saying, oh, this is a Turkish plan, and, it went so smoothly. Look how they conquered Damascus, whatever. No, this was very much a domestic, homegrown effort with the understanding of the leadership of this movement, that they had to engage with Turkey. These aren't people that are just stupid without any agency, without any ideas of their own. They know that Turkey is an influential neighbor, and they also knew that Turkey, could at least, with its Free Syrian Army proxies, check the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, who are linked to the PKK, or Kurdish Marxist organization, and they could at least check them and hold them off, keep them away from the Military Operations Command, the Syrian Military Operations Command, as they advanced south. Because what you can't do is advance south, and then all of a sudden you leave your rear open, and then Idlib is captured right from underneath your nose. You need to have something that will check them and hold them in place. So they obviously cut that deal with the Turks, who then coordinated with their proxies in the Free Syrian Army, the Syrian National Army, and these various other factions that are within the Turkish orbit. And there was also a very well-orchestrated charm offensive, where Jolani would specifically, send envoys and emissaries, and even he himself would attend gatherings, for example, of Christians, of Shi'i communities nearby, of even Alawites, sending them messages and whatever, and, you will be safe. We mean you no harm. There was an understanding, a maturity, a political maturity involved that showed that he understood that you can't just be making enemies with everyone. That's not to say I agree with all of his actions, by the way, but I'm just analyzing him as a leader who we're all going to have to be paying attention to in the coming years, and particularly in the coming months, to see what happens in kind of post-Assad Syria. But it's just to understand kind of his evolution from a more maximalist point of view on the Al-Qaeda framework to more understanding what is required to govern within the boundaries of a modern nation state. Now, of course, people are going to hear that, especially Islamists, for example, and say, we don't believe in nation states and whatever. Yeah. That's fine from a theological perspective. You can obviously hold that position. It's not ununderstandable, of course. But you're dealing with hard realities on the ground, facts. And the facts are these nation states do exist, whether you like them or not, whether you approve of them or not. And you have to find a way to work within the boundaries of the sandbox that you're placed into. And I think we can safely say to a large degree, Jolani has managed that through not only military conquest, but also through understanding that he has to reach out to various communities to gain their kind of buy-in to his project and his plans. And one of the slicker moves, you could say, was he did an interview with CNN, the American news network, which allows him to reach out again to a foreign audience. He's very much changed even the way he looks. He's no longer wearing turbans or whatever. I'm not saying that's a good thing. Again, I don't want guys to freak out at me. I wear turbans myself. I'm sure people have seen photos and videos of me wearing turbans. I've got nothing against traditional Islamic garb. I actually like it a lot. But I'm just saying, in the way that he's presenting himself, the marketing, the PR, when he sits with CNN, he's sat in his kind of Zelensky-style military uniform. He's saying all the right things. And then when they asked him about, like, his activities with these proscribed terrorist organizations. He's like, oh well, I was just a young guy at the time.
Yeah.
This is kind of like what teenagers did. It's a pretty wild thing to say if you think about it. And the way he kind of sidestepped the issue entirely, and knowing that people are going to have to deal with him from now on.
Yeah.
Only Allah knows what the future will bring, and if there's any kind of conspiracies going on behind the scenes to bring him down, or But he said, for example, all the right things so far that I can see. He has aggravated a lot of Iraqis. I know that because he released a communique in which he called the Hashd al-Shabi, which is, like I said, he was the umbrella organization that controls all of the Shia militant groups in Iraq and is directly linked to the Iranian IRGC Quds Force. And he's basically been overly, how shall we say, nice to them when he really didn't need to address them at all. He could have just stayed quiet. There's no need to address them. They're not really a threat. They were just making a few videos on the Iraqi border and then they withdrew. They can't take any action without Iranian authorization. It's a simple fact. So he was kind of sending messages to them that didn't need to be sent, which managed to anger quite a few Iraqi Sunnis. He also sent messages to the Iraqi Prime Minister, thanking him for restraining the Shia militias, the Hashd al-Shabi, and then he called the Hashd al-Shabi al-Hashd al-Iraqi, the popular Iraqi mobilization forces. But it's not, and that's obviously, it's difficult to explain the kind of nuance maybe in this short period that we have, but to call it that and to give it a national element when it is the most unpatriotic group in Iraqi history is incredibly egregious and offensive towards Iraqis who have suffered at their hands. But that's, he's not going to make, he's not going to make every right move. We have to bear in mind that he's going to make some silly moves. He's going to make some good moves. And this is a dispassionate analysis of his behavior, as opposed to me saying, I support him, I don't support him. It's less of that, and it's more a geopolitical analysis of this man, of this character, who's going to be very influential on the scene in the coming months and years, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no denying the fact that he's positioned himself as the leader. I mean, what happens from this point on? Do they go towards elections, or how do they? Will he take a step back, and say, what? Now it's up to you guys. Whatever you want to do, let's do an election. Then whoever wins.
Just to jump in there, he's actually already stated. He's already stated that once we've come in, we're handing over to the Syrian Salvation Government, civilian men. So it's not going to be military men who are in charge, and administration will be handed over to the Syrian Salvation Government. So we don't know what that means in terms of the future. Like, is it going to be a quote unquote Islamic system, or is it going to be more democratic system? Are there going to be elections, and then they rename the elections as Shura to make it more palatable to an Islamic audience? I don't know about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, and like I said, very very similar to Afghanistan 2.0, because what happened in Afghanistan was the same thing. When they came in, they're like, okay, we've done, and again, it was a very let's say bloodless kind of the takeover of Kabul, and when they took over, they're like, you know what, there's going to be an interim setup, and after a while, we're going to hand over to whoever it is, and what that process will look like was not very clear. But it has been more than 2 years now, 3 years, and that interim setup is still over there. Some of the promises that they made, apparently in the Doha Agreement, I have never read that agreement, that they will allow women's education and this and have you. They've like kind of gone back on all of those agreements. So maybe something similar might happen again, because again, geopolitics is so dynamic that they have to look at their own realities, and not that there's a reality of women don't want to get educated in Afghanistan, but they have their own internal constituencies, fighters. If they seem to be conceding too much ground on, let's say, women's education, they might have an insurgency on their hands. So similarly, Syria might have these kinds of, compulsions where they will have to look at, okay, this group might be more powerful. They're not happy right now. What can we do to pacify these guys? And then maybe have that adjustment in our own governance model. And you brought that very great point about moderation by governance. I think this happens a lot with happened with the Saudis, when for lack of a better term, when the Wahhabis took over, they were seen as very like bloodlust kind of group. But once they got into this whole governance process, that whole moderation started coming in, and to the extent now where you can't even, I can't even call them moderate anymore. They're like to the other extreme of liberalism, what have you. So this is kind of like a natural progression. So I do understand that, and that point is well taken. But now that we've kind of like talked about the political events or the political chessboard. Let me talk about some of the military or the kinetic responses that we have seen, and we've been very surprised with some of the, especially on the north when we saw. I think it's in the north that the tone was set. Once the people saw the new weapons and the new formations and the new tactics, I think the Syrian government or the Syrian army was like, you know what, we can't. I was about to drop an F bomb. We can't screw around here. Let's just start melting back. Okay, so what do you see? I mean, I've seen these FPV drones, for example. Okay, being used like projectiles. And I've been arguing this for a long time that drones will become like the light infantry of the future. You see this happening in every battle ground anywhere. We saw it in Armenia and what you call it, Azerbaijan's. What's the name of that place?
Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
We saw that happening there. Then we've seen it happen now in southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been using it, and now we're seeing the Syrians use it in Syria. So, what have you seen from a military perspective? What are let's say, the top 3 or 4 tactical changes that they've done in terms of weaponry, in terms of how they fight, that has kind of like changed the game?
So let's just make this clear. Inshallah, God willing, I'm going to travel out there once things settle down and once I try to verify the legalities of even traveling out there. But my intention is to travel out there to Syria, and I've already started the process of gathering interview subjects for a military analysis of this entire operation. That will include the military preparations, the political backdrop, and I intend to publish this as an academic study, inshallah. But from what I've garnered right now, and just kind of following it since, I've been following it for years, but specifically following the actual combat itself, that you could see in the ensuing 4 years, from that 2020 pause that we had up until now, there have been consistent improvements in not only tactical training, but also operational planning and understanding how to manage a campaign. A lot of people, just when they think of war, they think of a bunch of guys at the front with guns and rockets and whatever else, and you kind of wail on each other until someone gives up. But there's a finesse to these things. There's a highly underrated arm of the military, for example, is logistics. Because it's boring as hell, let's face it. No one wants to know about how many trucks with ammunition and resupplies, and even things as mundane as clothing and rationing and whatever else. It's boring, but it's one of the, an army marches on its stomach, basically. And increasingly in the modern day, it marches with a highly sophisticated technical repertoire at its disposal. So a major change is obviously we see, for example, the Shaheen Brigade and its use of FPV drone strikes. And these are not massively sophisticated drones, by the way. Like, they're not something like, even if we're looking at kind of mid-range drones like the Bayraktar TB2, which is used by the Turks in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Armenia and Azerbaijan, or how they were used, particularly at the start of the Ukraine war, until the Russians started to jam them quite effectively. It's not even as complicated as that. It's definitely nowhere near the complexity of US Predator drones. These are the high, cream of the crop, elite tools of war. What we're seeing with these drones is domestically manufactured low tech, and they are equipped with munitions, which are then aligned with the camera, placed onto the drone, and the operators will have to have some sort of line of sight to a degree, or be close enough so that the radio transmissions. I imagine the range of these things is not more than
How much? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be something like maximum 50 kilometers. Maximum.
Yeah.
That's me being very generous, because they have to be close enough from a ground control station for the signals to reach the drones, and also to feed back the visuals from the drone back to the operator, who can then target Assad regime forces. And so they used FPV strikes, where they literally fly a kamikaze kind of drone attack into military targets. And that was, by the way, not just against tanks or infantry formations, but they actually used it in fortifications. They used it for targeted assassination attempts. There was, at the time in Hama, before it fell, I saw a video, and I think I shared it as well, of an FPV strike on one of the Assad regime's command centers. So it's a building, and they flew this drone in through the window, and then the visual feed cuts.
Yeah.
So obviously there was a bang, but we don't know obviously the results of that bang, the explosion, who was taken out. But they did say it was a command center that was targeted. So that's an innovation that they worked on. They also had bomblets that they would drop. You even saw this, by the way, in Gaza, in Palestine, where these drones, which again very low tech, very unsophisticated, would fly over an IDF formation, usually light infantry, and you just watch the bomb just go, like this, and then explode. That, by the way, interestingly enough, and you may notice a bit of bias here, but a lot of this stuff was innovated in Iraq. So a lot of things, like, even when you see close range infantry personnel coming up to an armed vehicle or a tank and attaching a bomb to it, or putting it underneath a tank, or even onto a weak point in the armor, that was all innovated during the days of the Iraqi resistance against US occupation. The drone strikes and stuff like that all came later on as well. So these things are not new to me. I've seen them before. But coming back to the topic at hand, the HTS also invested heavily in their own form of special forces brigades. They managed to acquire for them night vision goggles, for example. There's one unit of about 250 men, and they only do nighttime operations. That's their one job. So they're trained to a very high level of specificity in night combat. They have night vision goggles. They have infrared targeting systems on their weapons, and they engage in nighttime raids and attacks, as you would imagine a special forces unit would. You've also got teams that are specialists in infiltrating behind enemy lines. Again, another special forces specialism. So this is what was kind of the main thing. This is when I knew that it was kind of game over for Assad. Is during the Battle of Halab. I spoke to a friend of mine, and he said to me, "Oh, we've just seen the special forces of the rebels coming out from the city center." So at the time, they still hadn't entered the city, right? So they were basically they'd sent these teams ahead. It wasn't a spur of the moment decision to just attack Halab, and then all of a sudden, when Aleppo fell, they decided, "Oh, you know what? We've got momentum with us. Let's go take Hama. Let's go take Homs. Let's go take Damascus." That's not the case at all. This was clearly planned, orchestrated, coordinated. So for you to have the wherewithal to send your forces, special forces units, in advance inside Aleppo, it means that you've got an intelligence network there as well.
Yeah, correct.
Help them set up to prep. Exactly. They knew exactly where to strike. I'm not sure if you remember, but early on in the battle for Aleppo, an Iranian brigadier general, military advisor, as they all are, was killed. He was killed by these special forces operatives. They knew exactly where he was. They knew the command center. They knew where to hit. And as the rebels were closing in, you had utter chaos inside the city of Aleppo amongst the ranks of the Assadists. And they're backed, obviously, by the Iranians and the Shia militias. So they knew exactly where to strike and where to target. Cause chaos within the city while the rebels were approaching from the exterior of the city. And then they met in the middle somewhere. So that just tells you as well, high level of sophistication, high level of planning, high level of training, and very specific training. This is the kind of stuff that when you see in like first world powers, you see their militaries and their special forces units, they train for specific scenarios and they war game them over and over and over again. So it's quite clear to me that the Military Operations Command has spent the ensuing 4 years from 2020 to 2024 logistically bettering themselves, building up a drone strike capability, building up a missile strike capability as well. They've even developed their own primitive cruise missiles, highly trained special forces units, and night fighting. These are the kind of the main features of what we've seen, as well as the fact that they were able to mechanize to a significant degree that once they did take a city, they were able to swiftly move on to the next target and the next target and the one after that.
Yeah. And that's great. Thank you for touching on all of this, because that's exactly what I was trying to come at. The intelligence level, the tech level of the drones and what have you, and even to the level of infantry, like how they kind of melted without detection inside what I can best call counterintelligence. Yeah, they were implanted inside the other person's intelligence, and they were able to kind of like before even their troops moved in, they were able to rattle them from within. So it's it's just from a military strategy perspective. When I look at it, it was just absolutely mind-boggling the way they pulled this off. And I guess that's what set the trend of everybody else then backing off. They realized that what, uh, this has gone way beyond us. Yeah, and we did see a lot of generals also and military figures kind of switching sides. So that was like one precursor to, okay, this fight is not worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze anymore. Um, Tell me this: a lot of people, because of how this capability is being developed. I mean, not a lot of people, and again, bias coming in from the Iranian propaganda side, that a lot of these weaponry that is being developed, um, from components all the way up to how to operate them, is being done through bad faith actors who are, again, let's say pro-Zionists. Okay, for example, they would say the Ukrainian military is sourcing parts for these drones, and they're training these militias to like the Shaheen Brigade, for example. They're saying that it's all completely trained by the Ukrainian military. I don't see that as a problem, even if that is true. I know that is not
So what?
100%
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
So what?
I mean,
who cares?
exactly.
This is the thing. This is the thing, brother. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It's this conspiratorial, frankly idiotic mindset that has held us back for so long. Yeah. But obviously, it goes without saying that Volodymyr Zelensky is Zionist, pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, whatever you want to call it. So what? In the game of politics, like I said, you're dealing with various factions with different agendas. You have an agenda, they have an agenda. Yeah. The guy next door has an agenda. Yeah. You need to figure out a way to maneuver in order to maximize your capabilities and your potential to succeed. You have your own, whether you want to call it a national interest, a group interest, whatever you want to call it. So, yes, there are reports that the Ukrainians helped with some of the technical training in terms of the development of this swarm drone technology. In other words, cheap drones that you could easily manufacture, cobble together, and you can do so in large numbers, and then just let them loose on the enemy line and wreck them. Yeah. So what? Ukraine has an interest in seeing Russia lose. Doesn't matter. They don't need to agree with you on everything. They don't need to be, muwahidun and whatever, and they're Muslims just like us. No, let's not be children here. This is the real world where adults live. Yeah, and these are big boy decisions. If your enemy has another enemy, and that enemy opposes you ideologically on 99% of things, but the 1% that they do agree with is that the people occupying you need to get wrecked. Yeah, then you cut a deal with them on that 1%. Yeah. It's not a case of abandoning your faith. I can never make a deal with a non-Muslim. They get on their high horse. I can never make a deal with a non-Muslim. These people do not believe in Allah. I don't care. No one sane thinks like this. And this is, like I said, these people have been holding us back for the past century. It's a very, juvenile, naive, idiotic way of thinking that is frankly destructive. And it doesn't matter where they get their weapons from. It doesn't matter where they get the training from. And by the way, they never apply the standard to, say, Hamas. They don't apply that standard to Hamas.
Yeah.
Where did Hamas get their weapons from? Well, I've got news for you. Again, the vast majority of their weapons are domestically manufactured. So despite Iran making a song and dance about it, supplying all of these, missiles and rockets and whatever else, their numbers are actually very slim indeed. It's mostly domestically manufactured. And again, these things are relatively easy to produce, they're cheap to produce, and you can do them in large numbers, and therefore you can focus mass on the battlefield. You don't need to get complicated parts. You don't need to contract out to a large Western arms manufacturer or an ex-Soviet arms manufacturer, and then you have these massive orders in. You can just do it in your own backyard with a few tools and parts and components that are heavily and prevalent within the region and elsewhere. So let's stop trying to think in this silly way. It's not helpful.
And Tawhid, let me just also mention that, look, if you have a problem with where Syrian militants are sourcing their parts from, and it seems to be sourced from here or from the CIA or who have you, there's a black market out there, okay? And everyone operates in that black market. It could be the Indians, it could be Pakistanis, it could be the Arabs, it could be anybody, the Americans, the Israelis. Everybody sells components there. They know that there's a business case for all of this stuff, and just the fact that you buy from them doesn't make you a lackey or let's say an intelligence operative. I'll give you an example
Exactly.
of what happened with these with Hezbollah with their pagers. Yeah, where do you think they were getting those pagers from, and how do you think the Israelis were able to implant themselves there? Because
Exactly.
again, that supply chain was from the people who you see as the enemy. Okay,
Mhm.
and they were able to exploit that to their advantage. Maybe it might happen someday with the Syrian fighters as well. But the fact is that people buy from the black market and from wherever they can buy to run their campaign. Just because you see those convergences doesn't mean that someone is an agent to someone. That's a very simplistic way to look at it. Um,
Exactly.
just
By the way,
you know,
by the way,
yeah, yeah,
I have to say, because you mentioned black markets and you mentioned Pakistan, some of the best gunsmiths I have ever seen on the face of this earth are from Pakistan.
yeah,
I have seen some incredible machinery come out of that country, I have to
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah. It's done over a long. I mean, and again, thanks for bringing that up. You look at Afghanistan, for example, and parts of KP, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is basically one part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, sorry, uh, one of the provinces that hits the border with Afghanistan. When you look at the way Afghanistan picked out the Americans, a lot of it was done by sabotaging the American goods or American supplies, and then using that against them. Okay, so for example, if you want to make bombs or what have you, you need fertilizer or anything of that sort. Where you can use explosives. You will source that from somewhere, and it could be your enemy themselves. So you never know. So just because you see that, and when Taliban were using American rifles to shoot down American soldiers, that quite clearly America was not handing it over to them. Here, you take this and shoot us. It's just that that's how this whole region operates. And when I see these simplistic takes online, Syrian girl or partisan girl, whatever her name is on Twitter, it's
Sorry, I
just
shouldn't
the
have
hope
laughed.
is absolutely unreal. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? You don't even know what you're saying. Somehow she's become this grand, uh, social media influencer. I'm like, the hell, man.
500,000 followers for that airheaded moron.
Oh man, I mean, she's got her audience, and that's how it is. Okay, just
Yeah,
let's move on. Yeah, I think we've
sure.
touched on how the Syrian resistance has approached this politically and militarily. I think we are now also very clear on, at least to a large extent, on what the groups look like and what we can uh, see is being planned forward. Like you just mentioned that Jolani said that they plan to hand this over to some kind of board, which I think will be formed by broad consensus, which will include foreign players as well. They will come into an agreement with, okay, this is how we need to go. Maybe elections might be the way, or shura, whatever you want to call it. And then a new governance body will take over, and hopefully things move forward. Um, there are a few complications militarily. There are reports of Israel now moving their tanks into mainland Syria beyond the
Yeah.
Golan. A lot of people are seeing that as, oh, look, this is again part of a greater Israel design and what have you, which could be partly true. But the truth is that the Israelis had started moving beyond the Golan at least 2 months ago, if not
That's
more.
right. That's right.
And we know that they've already moved into southern Lebanon 2 months ago. Okay, so they've started their campaign. They're now moving their infantry inside southern Lebanon. Well, maybe now they might be moving back, but I don't know. I haven't seen any proof on the ground that they've moved their forces back from South Lebanon. There is some
They're
kind
still
of
there. They're still there.
they're still there, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what do you say to the threats that are now emerging from these foreign players? How do you think that the Syrians will now, or will they tackle this for now? Would they rather concentrate on developing a government? And people need to understand when something like this happens, outside players will take advantage. Okay, they will try to break the formation and come into your territory. That's very, and they'll call the buffer or whatever, but it's them basically trying to take over your territory. So how do you see
Yeah.
this playing out? Do you think, and I'm kind of trying to look forward in the next few months.
Mhm.
Do we expect some clashes now happening on this side to push them back? Do you think Turkey might be a little apprehensive? Oh, this is not part of the deal. Maybe we need to get involved here. How do you see this Israeli encroachment into Western Syria?
So the Israeli encroachment is into Quneitra, and
Yes.
you know, in 1973, they took a similar route, basically to drive in towards Damascus, and that was checked by the Iraqi army. who quickly deployed within, I think it was within 24 hours notice, basically drove across the Syrian desert and slammed into the Israeli flank, pushing them back from Damascus. Um, which when you see the shambles of the Assadist army, you'll understand why it took the Iraqi armed forces to hold the Israelis back all the way back then, decades ago. So what Israel is doing now is to basically, they're using the excuse of a buffer zone or to make sure that there's no spillover into their border, but it's a serious security threat, and I think it will be perceived as such by everyone pretty much in Syria, aside from probably the Kurdish factions, particularly the SDF, and that's because they've not only had a long-standing relationship with Israel, but Israel has very recently, through its what's he called? I think the foreign minister Katz, was it called Katz? Maybe I'm mistaking him for the president, but that government's changed so many times in recent years. I keep forgetting who's who in the cabinet. But they recently released a statement saying that we need to basically intervene in Syria on the side of the Kurds. The idea being obviously that if they intervene on the side of the Kurds, then they can keep any forces within Syria from consolidating their power and rule and stabilizing the country. It's not in Israel's interests for Syria to stabilize. Obviously, that's going to be understood by those who are the rebel factions, and it will be a point of priority for them to begin to organize some kind of national government that can negotiate some kind of deal with the Russians, the Americans, and also resolve this Kurdish issue in the northeast of the country. The reason being, obviously, is Turkey is not going to want any kind of Kurdish power in this new Syria, unless it's part of a broader government that it can somehow influence and to guarantee the security and stability of its southern borders with Syria. The Americans have had a long-standing position in Syria, which was actually reduced by a few hundred men by Donald Trump when he was president in his first term. And if you see his statements very recently, he actually said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, this is not our problem. We need to get the hell out of there. We need to just see what happens, see what unfolds, and leave them to it. It's none of our business. We shouldn't intervene. He's due to take office in just over a month. So that's not long at all. And if he takes over, and we all know his penchant for cutting deals and being seen to be making good deals, as long as he's not swayed by an Israeli opinion, for example, and we know he's quite close to the Israelis, that it's in their vital interests that the Americans stay in and maintain firepower and whatever else there as a deterrent, and so on and so forth, then it could be a very positive development for the Syrians in the sense that you've now got a US president who doesn't think that the US should have bases everywhere and should be intervening in foreign military conflicts, but rather should have a position of, brass tacks, how much money can we make out of you? Are you willing to cut the deal? And I think, judging by Jolani's charm offensive, he's very much willing to cut the deal with the Americans. That much is clear. Does that mean that he's an American stooge all along? I can imagine people watching this recording and hammering away on Twitter. See, even Dr. Talha admitted. Yeah, but doesn't mean that he's a stooge. It just means sometimes you have to deal with actors that are significantly more powerful than you. It's a simple fact of life. There's no way that Jolani, for example, or anyone else in Syria can start a war with the US and hope to prevail. At the end of the day, the US is still the most powerful military power on the face of the earth. And if they needed to, they could deploy warships also to Syria. They could also redeploy to Iraq to bolster their forces there and invade across the border. I don't think that's a possibility, by the way. I'm just saying what could happen if the Syrians do something stupid, which I don't think that they will, judging by the way that they've been behaving. And the Israelis, if they try to maintain a position in Quraydara or elsewhere in Syria, I think, given time, they will be fought. I don't have any doubts in my mind about that. I think that they will be fought and they'll be pushed back. The Golan Heights is a long-standing issue for the Syrians, and it was lost by the Assad regime, who did nothing to regain it. I think that status quo, for now, will persist. I don't see the Golan Heights being retaken by the Syrians immediately or anytime soon. I think their primary focus will be to cut some kind of deal with the Americans, which will in turn involve the Kurds, which will in turn involve the Turks, and also cut a deal with the Russians, particularly as they have a naval base at Tartus, and they have an airbase at Hmeimim, and they're going to want to be able to govern without the threat of two major military powers being able to bomb them at will. So they want to be able to stabilize the country, get it back on its feet, and start thinking about maybe developing the economy. And Syria, historically, within the past, in the postmodern era at least, hasn't had the best economy. It's always been a really weak economy. Doesn't really produce much. Its oil fields are pretty sparse. It doesn't have high tech production or anything like that. So these are going to be things that this government's going to be seriously looking at. They've had 13 years of war. They've had half a century of Assadist dictatorship. They're not going to be looking to roll into another war again anytime soon. And I believe even if they engage with the Israelis, they're going to make it clear that their military aims would be to push them out of Syria's borders, and not to pursue them into Israeli-controlled Palestinian land. I think that's kind of the main thing. It would be very foolhardy of them to start another war after they've just come out of a grinding one that has absolutely destroyed the infrastructure, what little economic capacity and output that they had, and also led to one of the largest refugee crises in human history. They would be absolutely, ridiculous and insane to start a war now, especially with a power like Israel, which is armed to the teeth and has the serious military backing of the United States of America.
No, that's absolutely understandable. A lot of people, and again, because what people think is, oh, these guys are making these grand claims of an Islamic state and this and that. Therefore, their priority should be to go fight against Israel or what have you. Similar charges were leveled against Afghanistan that Taliban took over. What have they done for Palestine? So I mean, that's not how the real world rolls out, man. What do I say? But you mentioned the Russians, and all these advances that are had in record time, I think within a week, if not 10 days.
11 days.
Yeah, so they've like conquered conquered, for the lack of a better word, all of Syria. But what do you think it can be like? Let's say what we're not seeing. There could be some concerns about a resurgent Russia. Okay, you talked about Donald Trump when he assumes back office. He could be in a position where he may de-escalate in the Ukraine, for example, which will give Russia more bandwidth. Maybe maybe this is a tactical retreat where now they're just waiting for Trump to take office, and then they'll come back, full steam, and they'll everything that we've seen, all these advances can be rolled back just as quickly. 11 days, maybe 11 days more to push them back. All of these are possibilities. So, how do you see it? For number one, how do you see this this threat of the reemergence of Russia back and exerting influence back in Syria? And how much truth is there in the Russian naval forces now evacuating Tartus and the other bases that they have, the naval bases that they have? What do you know about this?
So for Russia to be successful in Syria and try to roll these gains back, they need a local partner on the ground. Unless they're willing to engage in a full-scale invasion themselves, they need a local partner. Previously, that local partner was Assad. And the Shabiha, organized under the National Defense Forces, the Iranians, and their various Shia militias. A lot of these guys have now been either crushed, captured, or some of them, or large numbers of them, in fact, have defected. Okay, so they've been issued new ID cards, they've been issued papers. They're going to keep a close watch on them in case they should, turn their coats again, which is a distinct possibility. But they're not organized anymore in the fashion that they used to be, with the so-called Syrian army, different regiments and brigades and battalions and divisions. The NDF, as I mentioned earlier, it's not organized in such a manner anymore. So Russia also, like you said, is tied up in Ukraine. If he de-escalates in Ukraine, I mean, this kind of puts them on the clock to try to find some kind of a solution, I suppose, the Syrian rebels, that is. I say Syrian rebels, they're not rebels any longer. The Syrians...
Government now, pretty much.
They're going to be the government very soon. Yeah, they're in control of the main heartland. So one thing that the Russians can do, I suppose, is that in the coastal areas, there's still quite a large Alawite community of Nusayris, and a lot of them fled from Homs and from Hama and these other areas that they were holding previously, and they fled into the plains and mountains that surround the coastal areas, from Latakia all the way down to Tartus and the Mediterranean coast, basically. So they could technically use them, but they're such a small minority. Their morale has hit absolute rock bottom. They're disorganized, disunited, and they lack a leader. A real leader, someone who's charismatic and well known. We've had reports that Assad has fled to one of these Russian bases, and the idea is that maybe they'll evacuate him to Moscow. We don't know yet. We haven't got the full details. Maybe there's been some details while we've been chatting, which we'll catch up on after when we finish this conversation. But up until now, we have no idea who's going to take him. It could be either the UAE offering him sanctuary, like they did with the Zain al Abidine Ben Ali, who's the former leader of Tunisia who was overthrown, or he could go to Moscow. But the point is, the remnant forces are in a shambolic state, and it will take significant resources to bring them back up. So even if a deal was cut in Ukraine, I think Putin is looking for a win. He's looking for something to show to the Russian people to say, look, it was worth going into Ukraine because we got the Donbass region. We still hold on to Crimea. We still hold on to whatever. And we now have a deal whereby Ukrainian membership to NATO, for example, or the EU has been shelved permanently. So we've got a buffer zone now in Ukraine between us and the Western democratic powers. In the meantime, obviously, since the Ukrainian war in particular, Russia has been subjected to countless sanctions regimes, and their economy has taken an absolute battering. They don't have the resources. So when they were redeploying forces to capture or recapture, I should say, the Kursk region during the Ukrainian offensive into Russia, that's going to have had an impact on Russian strategy, and it would have definitely had an impact on Syrian rebel strategy, because they would have seen what was going on. They would have seen troop movements. They would have probably been coordinating to some degree with Turkish military intelligence as well, who would have informed them and supplied them perhaps with images and intelligence of the Russian redeployments. They'd be closely following through open source intelligence news about the Russian economy and its performance, or lack of performance, as the issue currently stands. And they would have thought to themselves, okay, then this may be a golden opportunity for us. I don't think Russia is going to be too keen to rolling back into Syria when they don't have anyone that they can partner with, and where they've basically lost everything, and they're just desperate for a win that they can go back to the Russian people with and say, look, after all these years of war in Ukraine, we've secured our borders. Perhaps maybe they'll cut a deal with the revolutionaries in Syria and say, look, we also have a warm water port in the Eastern Mediterranean now in Syria. We've kept those holdings, blah, blah, blah. We don't know the specifics of this arrangement with Syria or what may play out, but I suspect that that's what they will be aiming for, to cut some kind of deal. They did release a statement I think it was a day or two ago, and they said, it's up to Assad, it's up to the regime and its forces to stand their ground and fight for their country. It's not Russia that's going to come in and fight for them. Absolutely. We can support them, and they did support them. They gave them some air support, but obviously not as much as they did in 2015 and 2016 and onwards, for example, because they're a bit too busy in other theaters of war. But they said it's down to you. We can't come and bail you out each time that there's an insurrection against you, or someone's taken a decision to operate militarily against you. You need to stand your ground. 200,000 soldiers, approximately, in the Syrian Ba'athist army, and they just melted away.
Not a bullet fired, yeah.
They just melted away. Some of them stood their ground, some of them fought. I saw a hilarious video of an Israeli soldier in the Assad regime, and he was recording a video and cursing Assad, using some extremely bad Arabic curse words, saying, your men didn't fire a single bullet. They left us here. They abandoned the city. And guess what? Not only have they abandoned the city, not only did your men not fire a single bullet, not only have you done nothing for us in the past 13 or 14 years, but I'm also defecting to the rebels now. So you get when someone's morale has been crushed that badly, it's a very, very tall order for an economically crippled country like Russia to just, come back in with its rusty tin bucket warships, with the planes falling off of the sides into the Mediterranean. They're a knackered force. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And Talha, that's what's sad, that, we have been, myself, you, and a few others have been talking about how we're seeing this on the ground. And, I'm not even like an Arab to begin with, but I'm not a Syrian, quite clearly. And I was seeing that on the ground, that there's a change happening. Okay. And Bashar can no longer flow against the stream, swim against the stream anymore. He seems to be like a sitting duck. And I kept saying for the past like 3 or 4 months that, look, there's no way Turkey can sit out this war anymore. They will have to come in. Russia cannot keep backing a force that. And if you look at even the Shia axis of resistance, you can see that the guys from Yemen, they've done something. They've fired rockets or what have you. They've kind of like done a good job with in terms of what they've done with their limited capabilities. Okay, they've kind of choked up the Bab al-Manda, for example. And then Hezbollah has done whatever they've done. But what has Bashar al-Assad done? He did practically nothing. Okay,
Nothing.
all he did was he let Iranian missiles fly over his airspace. That's pretty much all that his contribution has been in this Shia-led. Let me not say Shia. Let's say Iran-led.
It's definitely Shia. It's definitely Shia.
Yeah. Fight against the Israelis. So I mean, and I forgot the point that I was coming to.
You're talking about like Assad's contribution. Oh, here's an interesting tidbit actually for you.
Yeah.
Is Assad's contribution to the so-called axis of resistance, and this is kind of reported through various Syrian local journalists, was that they suspected, and this is Hezbollah suspecting this, by the way, and Iran, that it was Assad himself that was leaking information about the locations of these senior IRGC and Hezbollah commanders to get hit by the Israelis. So he basically stabbed his own guys in the back, his so-called brothers in arms. And the reason why he did that, by the way, is because he thought he had won the Syrian war. So he was kind of looking to the future, and he was like, you know what, the Russians, I can't get rid of them. And in fact, they're kind of handy to have around because they're going to protect me. Or so he thought, right? But the Iranians and Hezbollah, they're taking me for granted. They want things off of me. They control various aspects of the Syrian economy, like including the telecommunications networks, by the way, was owned by an IRGC aligned subsidiary and company. So he was thinking to himself, I would quite like to have some sort of grip and power back on my kingdom of bones. So he was leaking information, or that's the working theory. He was leaking information about the locations of these various IRGC advisors and generals and whatever.
Could be.
I think so. I think he did because
wasn't it the Syrian foreign minister back in the day who turned out to be an Israeli implant? Like I forget the guy's name.
There's a lot of stories like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, even by the way, with the Iranians. So the I should. Sorry, it's just too funny. So the Iranians had a guy that they a department that they set up for counterintelligence.
Right.
And it was specifically designed, so-called, to root out Mossad foreign agents. And it turns out that the guy that they had appointed to head up this department was a Mossad implant himself.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the level of absurdity. When all of these ideologists sitting online or in their basements like myself think about what kind of fight they're putting up, and they think about all these idealistic scenarios that this will happen, that will happen. Man, look where we stand today. We're completely compromised. How do you expect to take them on when you're so compromised? You can't. So, I mean, from the very fact that they were able to disrupt your entire pager, attack you from where you could not even see them. Okay, and still you have them so close to your heart. So when you have that kind of leverage, how are you even expecting any other outcome than those guys winning? Hands down.
This is the thing. They achieved the level of power, and by they I mean Iran and its axis. They achieved the level of power that they've achieved over the past 20 years since the fall of Iraq and its occupation and invasion. They achieved that through direct Israeli support. But there's no question about this. I raised this in my debate with Daniel Haqiqatjou, for example, and I raised how Israel was one of the main backers and brokers of Iranian military aid and political aid during the Iran-Iraq war. This is while Khomeini was saying, death to America, death to Israel, death to the greater Satan, death to the lesser Satan, saying that, the road to Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem goes through Karbala and Najaf, and, we have to destroy the Iraqis first, and then we can move on, and, all of this talk. And at the end of the day, their biggest backers, their biggest supporters were Israel, and they were sharing intelligence with them. They were receiving, they gave Israel the intelligence of how to, the flight paths that they should take, for example, to bomb the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1982, the so-called Osirak Tammuz nuclear facility. That was all done hand in hand with the Israelis. and the Iranians and the Israelis cooperated with one another. Again, I'm not saying that this is some kind of conspiracy whereby
It's
the
converging
Jews.
interests, man.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
exactly.
converging
They're just
interests.
interest. Exactly, and
Yeah.
the Iranians massively overplayed their hand. They overplayed their
Yeah.
hand to the degree
Yeah.
where it's in Netanyahu's political interest to bring up a boogeyman, some kind of monster, right? And who's he going to do that to when it comes to the Sunnis? He can only do that really to Hamas when it comes to the Sunnis. But the other Sunni states, everyone's destroyed. Everyone's gone. Saddam Hussein, again, whatever his many faults are, but he did fight against Israel. He did, attack them. He fought against them. He trained Palestinians. A lot of the, by the way, their drone technology came from the roots of it from Iraqi military officers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is acknowledged by Hamas, by the way. So all of this stuff, Iraq was destroyed. It's gone. Syria was never really a threat. The Egyptians abandoned Palestine decades ago. The Gulf Arab states, they always try to stay out of it. We know this. So what's he going to do? He can't do anything except for to say, Iran, axis of resistance. Look what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I laughed earlier in the episode. I laughed and I said, despite them doing the bare minimum to try to kind of save face and pretend that the axis of resistance was real, because Netanyahu had a political survival imperative to paint someone as the enemy that they have to destroy, it ended up destroying Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah, now Assad. Yeah, it's not Israel that's destroying them. It's not Israel. Israel may have destroyed Hezbollah and make them weak, but this was then creating an opportunity for these rebel factions to say, okay, now is the time to strike. Those 4 years of preparations that we've made, now we can strike. Now we can put that to use. We spent 4 years preparing. Assad spent 4 years thinking that he'd won the war, and Syria became ever more corrupt. Its officer class became ever more incompetent. Its men ever more lazy, indolent, untrained. They were paid something like $30 a month. You know how, I don't even need to explain to you how bad $30 a month is. So imagine you're an Assadist soldier, right? You're there in his armed forces. You've got guys who have been persecuted for decades. Some of them are young boys, maybe 18, 19 years old, and all they've ever known is Assadist tyranny. These guys are motivated to fight you, to capture you, or kill you. And then you're thinking, you're on the front line, you're facing these guys, these very motivated mujahideen killers. You're facing them in the heat of battle, and you're thinking, am I really going to die for that giraffe-necked loser in Damascus for $30? Have my AK, I surrender.
Yeah, true, man. And, just talking about these third forces and how they spring up, it has always been the case that, the two elephants that go head to head eventually tire each other out or, injure each other to beyond fighting capabilities themselves, and then a third force rises. I mean, we've seen that in Islamic history too, where the Sassanids versus the Byzantines, they fought each other off like nuts over so many years, even before Islam, the Prophet ﷺ came onto the scene. They just obliterated one another, and then they were still superpowers, no doubt. But then when the Muslims started rising, they were able to take advantage of them having this let's say military fatigue, and just in very quick time taking over their territory. So I think something similar may happen over here. I mean, not that I'm trying to paint a rosy picture or give anybody any straws to clutch at, but this is something that we have seen in the past. Okay, so and the point that I was coming back to was that, like you said, Russia needs a local partner inside Syria to operate. Yes, there may be some kind of, people are showing satellite imagery of Russian ships sailing out, I don't know where. But I believe that at the end of the day, I'd always championed myself, even when the fight started back in 2011, that Sunni states, and specifically I referred to Saudi, UAE, and the Khaliji bloc, that they can exert their influence to get the Russians on their side. The problem with the Sunni world back then was that they had taken Russia as such an enemy that they were just unwilling to talk to them and appreciate them as a power broker. At the end of the day, you have to talk to people who are strong in the region, no matter what disagreement you have to do, no matter how much they've done wrong to you. There's no denying what the Russians have done to the Syrian people over the years. Unfortunately, you got to move on. It's the way it is, and I feel that at the end of the day, Russia cannot compromise their gate into the Mediterranean. I mean, yes, they do have access from the Bosphorus side, from the Black Sea, but that's a very narrow strait that is pretty much in the hand of Turkey and let's say NATO extended. Okay, so they could always choke them, and then Russia has zero access to any warm waters, maybe through Iran, but even that is a little challenging. So they would want to protect their interests inside, um, the coastal belt of Syria, and I think they will be more than willing to work with the. And they've shown this, like you said, that we can't fight Assad's war in indefinitely. At some point we got to draw the line and say, you know what, if you're not willing to fight, screw you. We're moving to the next power broker here. So just as a last thing, because the way I see this, I talked about the domino effect. We saw kind of like Sunni reemergence happening with what Hamas did in October. It spilled out now to Syria. I think this is not going to stop here, obviously, because there are concerns. And like I said, if there's any chance of a reemergence by Iran, they will want to push through Iraq. Okay. What do you see this reemergence of Syrian power of Sunni groups inside Syria? How will this play out in the next few days, specifically in the key states of Iraq? And let's say this might even impact Egypt to some extent. Like they might feel, oh, you know what? Maybe we might see some kind of insurgency here by some Sunni groups against the Egyptian army. So how do you see this domino effect in the rest of the Arab world?
I mean, it's an important thing to point out is I think that the Arab regimes and the Gulf monarchies in particular, when they did support the Syrians, it was always a lukewarm support and with the aim of somehow checking Iranian advancement and power. It was always half-hearted support. It was never, as long as they could cut a deal with Iran, whereby Iran would kind of give them guarantees that they're not going to encroach into their kingdoms and territories and whatever.
Yeah.
We've seen how, Khaliji Gulf Arab countries are willing to sell people out. They did so in Iraq, for example. Absolutely, they sold the Iraqi people out. They tried to do a charm offensive, even with some of like the worst sectarian murders in Iraq, like Muqtada Sadr, for example, Shi'i cleric, who they thought that they could peel him away from Iran by giving him hundreds of millions of dollars. And within that charm offensive ended around 2019 or so, because within a month or two after him taking all of those millions of dollars, he attended a commemoration of the 40-year anniversary of Khomeini's revolution in Iran, and he was pictured sitting at Khamenei's feet, and next to him was Qasem Soleimani, who a few months later would be turned into char-grilled kebab on a Baghdad highway on the orders of Donald Trump, right? So it's not a case of them supporting the Syrians because they believed in the revolution. It was only because they feared Iran, and when that fear of Iran became somewhat placated, that's why they totally dropped off. You said that you noticed the support disappeared around 2017, 2018. It was actually a bit sooner than that, but the main reason for that was because they had some kind of understanding with the Iranians. And as long as they were left alone, they were content, more or less. They may not like the Iranians, but they're like, whatever, we can work with this. Now, the key reason as well why the Gulf monarchies despised, and to this, as recently as in the past week, they were issuing communiques, particularly in the United Arab Emirates, saying how they support the Assad regime in its fight against terrorism, right? So look at the phrasing as well. In its fight against terrorism. So this includes groups that are backed by, for example, Turkey, groups that have had previously connections to the United States. So essentially the UAE is saying that at some point or another, the US itself was supporting terrorist organizations. Yeah, state sponsor of terror, more or less. Which, by the way, is true. Not necessarily in the sense of the Syrian context, but America has been well known to support all kinds of factions, in a pragmatic basis. And like I said to you, to someone else on Twitter, it doesn't matter when they have a state blacklist about who's a terrorist organization and who isn't. It's a politically charged list. A terrorist on that group, on the list, can one day be a terrorist. The next day, when it serves their interests, they'll say, oh, they're no longer on the list. It's as simple as that. These lists change all the time. So a key consideration for these Arab states is the Arab Spring, the whole idea of this revolution against established norms that have been the status quo since essentially the end of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah. Yes, we've had some changes. So kingdoms like the Kingdom of Iraq or the Kingdom of Syria became republics, but more or less the same power structures stayed in place. The same accommodations with foreign powers stayed in place to a degree. Of course, it's more complex than that. I don't want to, oversimplify, and I don't want to insult the intelligence of anyone who's listening to this. Particularly in Iraq, for example, a lot changed after it went from a monarchy to a republic, and then changed again when it went from the control of certain brands of nationalists to other brands of nationalists, who are the Baathists, for example. I don't want to insult the intelligence of anyone, but broadly speaking, the power structures stayed more or less the same. So, in a situation like that, where you've got rebels who have now shown that, yes, we can succeed, we can overthrow and establish power, and we can become the new power, they're going to be very concerned, because they're going to be thinking, well, what if there's a domino effect? What if, for example, this happens in Iraq? Which, by the way, inshallah, I pray that it does. We've been under the oppression of the Iranians for far too long, and the Americans, and they've had all manner of allies supporting them in their oppression. So inshallah, Iraq will be next when it comes to liberation. But it's going to put fear into these long-standing regimes and monarchies who have had their own selfish interests at heart and not the interests of their own people. And that's why we saw in the Arab Spring, for example, a lot of the support for Sisi, for anti-revolutionary forces in Libya in the form of General Haftar, in Tunisia when they supported the current president, Qais Said, for example, against and by the way, I'm not saying that I necessarily support, but I'm well known for criticizing Ennahda, for example, in Tunisia. But I'm just saying that they went from a so-called, democratic representative government to an autocracy, which was backed by the wealth and power of these Gulf Arab monarchies. And they're going to be concerned now that, okay, what's it going to look like in a post-revolution Syria? Is that revolutionary fervor going to be spilling over the borders? Or are we going to have some kind of arrangement with them whereby they keep themselves to themselves, they don't get involved in anyone else's business? And by the way, the messaging that's been coming out from particularly Jolani's camp is that, yes, we're not interested in getting involved in anyone else's affairs. We just want to stabilize Syria, look after the interests of the Syrian people, etc., etc. That obviously is going to cause some concerns across the border in, just say, Iraq. The Iraqi government, and I posted up a video on my own channel, The War Journal, which was a video of the spokesman for the commander-in-chief of the Iraqi armed forces, the commander-in-chief being the Prime Minister, Ahmed Shia Sudani, and his spokesman is Major General Yahya Rasool, who was, very active during the whole campaign against ISIS. And he said in a long interview that, these people, they call themselves the opposition, they call themselves revolutionaries. They're not revolutionaries, they're terrorists, they're criminals. And we dealt with their likes in 2014. So he's basically drawing an analogy directly between them and ISIS, who in 2014, as we all know, conquered about a third of Iraq. And he was saying, if they so much as approach the Iraqi border, even before they reach the Iraqi border, we're going to strike them. We have intelligence assets that have already infiltrated them, blah, 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 blah. So this is not from some, militia peasant who has no say in affairs and he's just, doing some kind of TikTok video. This is a major general in the Iraqi armed forces who also is a spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office. Mm-hmm. And it shows the genuine fear and concern that they have that what happened in Syria will happen also in Iraq. And I predict that it will. Not now, but it will. Because the sheer oppression that has been visited upon the Iraqi people over the past 20 years is to such a degree that it actually dwarfs what happened in Syria. The issue with the Iraqis is that a lot of the stuff that goes on in Iraq is not as well reported. It's not as well known. In the English language, I'm one of the only Iraqis out there. So whereas the Syrians have hundreds of analysts, hundreds of sharp analysts and whatever, but when it comes to the Iraqi situation, I'm one of the only guys out there, which is a crying shame. But it shows the level of oppression and fear that they've successfully managed to leverage against the Iraqi people. If I'm the only one there, and I receive death threats all the time, by the way. My family in Iraq also receive death threats, for what I say in public. So they're going to be afraid that the Iraqi people that they've put under their boot for so long are going to rise up. And we've seen it happen before. In 2012, 2013, there was a massive protest movement, which was eventually deteriorated into violence. And that's when ISIS used the vacuum to take advantage, and the rest is history. It happened also again, but in a more Shi'i-led, protest movement around 2018, 2019, and that was violently suppressed by pro-Iran forces, including Sadr, by the way. So obviously, all of these people are going to be looking across the border, seeing what happens, and I'm talking about regular Iraqi people here, and thinking, they managed to achieve it. Why can't we?
Yeah.
And that question is a difficult idea to kill. It's a very difficult idea to kill. When someone looks across the border and sees people living with some kind of freedom, with the ability to not be discriminated against, with economic opportunity, when they see all these things, they're thinking, well, they have it and we want it for ourselves too. Why don't we get rid of our guys? So this could be the start of something new in Iraq. And I would say the main country to watch out of all of these countries is Iraq, because that is also the central linchpin of Iranian power in the entire region. If Iraq goes, Iran is finished. It will have no more grasp on the region, and what's known as the eastern gates of the Arab world will once more be strong and seal out the Iranian menace again. And I just want to say one final thing before we wrap up. We know a lot of people that will say, for example, to the Syrians, they used to say to them, get over it, get over what happened. Yeah. I'm looking at people like Dr. David Miller in the UK, Daniel Haqiqa Joe in America. Get over it. What, do you just want perpetual civil war? What I have to say to them is now it's your turn to get over it, because Assad is gone, his power is broken, and Iran is now in retreat. Get over it.
Yeah. So nicely put. All the things that they say about how infighting is kind of taking away from the Palestinian cause. Now that they're seeing on the other end of the equation, if they start fighting back, then you're doing nothing but what you accuse the other side of being sectarianly, showing their sectarian colors. You're doing the exact same thing. I mean, you might say that you're Sunni all you want, but with whatever you seem to be supporting, it doesn't seem that you are Sunni. But I know you're planning a trip to Syria soon, like you said at the beginning of this podcast. When you do, sorry.
Pending the legalities.
Pending the legalities, yeah. If you do end up going there, I would love to have you again, because just getting that ground feel, more information, I would love that. Thank you so much for your time, Talha.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to follow you over the years. I forgot to mention at the beginning, I wanted to introduce you that way, but it was this early morning here, so I kind of forgot that besides him being a PhD in all of these great sciences, he also does a very good impression of Persian English. So to that someday.
Yeah, maybe one day I'll give it a live rendition, but not today. I'm too tired.
Yeah. All right. All the best with your backyard work. I know you've
very much.
Yeah. We'll catch up. All right. Take care.
Definitely, absolutely. Thank you very much, brother.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.